to 5 seconds. Colburn shoots, deflected, score! The Flyers tie it with 2.8 seconds remaining. Excellent for them. So the Penguins have had leads of 2-0. 3-1. Now Couturier ties it at 5. Sean Couturier with his second goal of the night.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is Isaiah, your host. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode 213. The Flyers have gone 0-1-1 since our last episode. They've named a captain, Sean Couturier, and an alternate. We'll get into that. The Flyers are 29-20-7 for 65 points overall, clinging to a playoff spot with 26 games remaining. And we have the Islanders, and more importantly, and more concerningly, the Devils, who they just played, on their heels. We'll discuss that. We have 8 games left before the trade deadline, and yet, according to Money Puck, the Flyers still have a 73% chance of making the playoffs. So we'll see how that turns out. We know the worm can turn pretty quickly right now, the way the standings are all stacked up, and the Flyers don't have as many regulation wins as some of the other teams. That tiebreaker is not working in their favor. So without any further ado, let's bring on our panel. Always to my left, Chef B, what's the word?
The word is playoff run, and we'll see if it's really a playoff run. It'll be, hey, look, it's going to be fun, exciting either way, whether they make it or they don't make it. It's just going to be some fun hockey to watch. So looking forward to it, and looking forward to talking about a couple of things here.
Absolutely. And as always, the great Dan Stover joins us.
I'm sitting here. I was running a contest on Twitter. I got an autographed prospect jersey, and I posted on Twitter saying if anyone can guess what jersey I got and what player is going to score the first goal for the Flyers in the game against the Hawks, they'll win a prize. So okay. I'm sitting here in my Denver Barkey autographed jersey. So that's the first half of the contest. We'll see who can maybe finish it out. And then I got some bumper bonk shirts from the London Knights because he's been playing the bumper on the power play there. So I'm going to give one of those out as a prize to whoever wins that contest. And I'm going to have a bunch more of them at the March 1st game. I'm going to organize a little get-together with some Flyers fans. So that's what I'm excited about.
Fantastic. And we are pleased to be joined tonight. You know him from sportsology.com. You also know him from a few podcasts, the Laughton Flyers podcast, Off the Post podcast. He's a frequent contributor on Sirius XM radio. Russ Cohen, how are you, man?
Good, guys. Isaiah, how are you?
All right. Doing okay. So the Flyers didn't really help their cause over these last 2 games, losing against Toronto, but salvaging a point, getting burned yet again, Russ, by a superstar. Is somebody trying to tell us something? And, of course, getting burned a little bit by a couple of the stars with the New Jersey Devils. So We're going to get into the trade talk and things like that, but I wanted you to go through your experience with the Stadium Series. There's been a mixed reaction. Some people on the macro level see it as, wow, you had 150,000 people at the stadium for these back-to-back games. Other people think it's a little tired. And then some others, like myself, thought that some of it was detracted from a TV perspective by ESPN's presentation. But what say you?
Okay, so, I mean, if people don't think it's worthwhile, then ignore the 150,000 people. Just ignore them. Like, it's hard to do that. So to me, that's like silly. They were there, they were loud, they were buying stuff. That's what leagues want. As far as the presentation, I'll say this is the best way I could say it. When I heard Gary Thorne do the game-winning goal for his grandson, I was wishing he was doing those two games. Even if you don't have Gary Thorne all year, just for the really big games. He's the really big voice that we all wanted and we didn't get. So, and that's, Sean McDonough he's just Sean McDonough. It's not his fault. He's not bad. It's just that a lot of minutia, not enough really good hockey talk during the game. And, in the press box, we get to hear it. And I was just like, I don't know. It was kind of like milk toasty. And I think that's what, a lot of people thought.
Yeah, I think so too. Dan, I was really happy to hear about Max Weinberg having a little rink in his backyard, just as the Devils were scoring on the Flyers and making it 2-0. That really went over very well with me as a fan. I was like, wow, I'm so glad I know about the backyard rink.
Look, I have an opinion on these outdoor games. I've been to 3 of them. I hate them. I hate going to them because what I like about going to hockey games is that it's a very intimate environment. You're close to the action and it's loud. Like even going to Eagles games, I have fun, but it's not to me, when you're outdoors, it's not as loud. Like I like going to hockey games because it's loud, it's close, it's indoors. It's everything that the outdoor hockey games are not. Now, it hasn't helped that the Flyers have lost every single outdoor game I've gone to, but I feel like it's a spectacle, right? And the NHL, I think, does a really good job with it as a spectacle. I personally am never again going to spend my hard-earned money going to an outdoor game because I just don't have fun. Like I went to Pittsburgh for the outdoor Flyers game at Heinz Field. The Flyers got smoked. It wasn't fun. I was freezing. I could barely see the rink. Like that's my experience with outdoor games. Do I like watching them on TV? Sure. That's my honest opinion on the outdoor games.
What's funny though, Dan? Like if you were talking to someone for the league, they'd be like, that's okay. We've got like some 20-something, 30-something people that are younger than you that haven't been, and they'll go.
Of course. I'm not at all making judgments on if it's a good
That's what it's
event.
for, though. That's what I'm trying to say.
I'm just saying personally, I don't like them. But that is not to say that they're not good for the league and that other people and that it's not a good spectacle. That's just my personal opinion on the outdoor games.
Yeah. Now, Chef, we were treated to an encore on ESPN when we got to compare the chubby thighs of Gary Bettman with Emily Kaplan. Emily, no problem. You're a far, far distant second place to Gary. It reminded me of What's Up, Tiger Lily when the spy was accused of having chubby thighs. But again, they had this interruption, and that's my biggest issue with the presentation. I'm not the kind of guy who would go to an outdoor game. I can't be bothered with going for all the reasons Dan cited. But I'm not. I'm kind of one way or the other. It doesn't matter.
Let's see here. Could Gary Bettman get any more creepy? I mean, really? He's creepy enough. He didn't need any help with the thigh thing. So that's my first thing. But also this, I understand the whole spectacle that is the outdoor ring. Because guess what? It's not for us. It's not for the adults. It's not even for the younger players. It's for the kid in all of us, especially the northern states and Canada. This is how they grew up. This is how they played. They played on the pond. Or you actually had some parents out there, much like, Max Weinberg's family, who actually freezed over their backyards and, and did all these things so that their kids could ice skate and play all winter. I get that. That's the feeling they're going for. And for us people that are in the mid-Atlantic states that don't necessarily get to see all that, it is a spectacle. I think I would like to go to one and just to see what it's like. I don't know if I would like it, but I still think I understand it all, because if you're going up to Michigan and you're playing it, up in Michigan, what is it next year? Detroit is playing in Ohio Stadium, right?
Where the Buckeyes play, right?
Yeah, that's right. And they're
Ohio
playing
State.
the Blue Jackets. That's great. I think that's the best idea. Take one of the the original six and throw them in an area where you need help drawing people. I think it would help. I think that's where these games can make a little more sense, because we all know, look, even if Anaheim is great, you can't do one with Anaheim and San Jose. It's just ridiculous. It won't draw. But if you had Anaheim maybe playing Edmonton or maybe somewhere up in north, I think you could get some action there. And I think it would make sense to do that, because you have to have one marquee team. And if you're trying to push it over the top, these things, you have to have that one marquee team. That's what I think. Otherwise, I like it. I look forward to each of them. I like watching them on TV, and I think I might want that experience just once. And I think that's it, though.
I can appreciate that. The Flyers have a 1-4-1 record all time. In fact, the last game they won was, Chef, you were talking about it on Twitter. We had an event at Steam Pub in Southampton, Pennsylvania, and that was the night after the big game. Yeah. And that was Wayne Simmons' last game as a Flyer, and Drew wins the game. So that was a nice story, and we were in a lot better mood that night. So Sean Couturier, Russ, is now the Philadelphia Flyers captain, with the alternates being TK and the continued alternate captaincy status for Scott Laughton. I guess there's no real surprises there. What about the timing of that? Does that tell you anything, or is it just like, well, we have the big game coming up, maybe it would be good to have a captain?
No, I mean, that's exactly, Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers asked that question at that press conference to Keith Jones, and he kind of had a smirk on his face. And so, we've kind of been waiting for that. Because that to us, that was kind of like a little bit of a tell, like, hey, yeah, we're going to wait for that, and that's when it's going to get unveiled. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, when you hear maybe John had to hear how he handles, criticism and all these other things, it's like, just stop. Every team in the league would want a Sean Couturier if he's healthy. You don't need all this other stuff to justify it was going to happen if he was healthy. I think that's really the big thing.
Yeah, no, I can see that. So the big story this week, and it was amazing, the freak out that happened, was just a kind of like a rumor and Russ, I don't have to tell you, this is a time of year when agents and teams are jockeying and using their leverage or lack of leverage to try to position themselves better for the trade deadline that's upcoming. So Elliot Friedman was talking about Sean Walker, and they're thinking that the pendulum has swung more towards them re-signing him. And part of the reason is that Drysdale would be asked to do things that he can't currently do defensively at the age of 21. He's kind of raw in his own zone. I mean, the four-way mobility and all the things we like are there. They're evident. We can see it. But, and as Kevin Kurz had talked about, a comparison with Noah Dobson. It's two different players, like you pointed out.
Yeah, there's no comparison to Noah Dobson. I'm not even going to try.
No, but in terms of development, what Noah was at 21 versus what he is now, and if you could put a graph on that versus Drysdale, what he will be at 24. So there's a development curve there. So that's the rationale. People were freaking out. People have been really uncomfortable with their success. There's been a large segment, or at least maybe a vocal is probably a more accurate way to say, a vocal segment of the population that feels like we've been getting burned by these top end players all year. How are we going to get one other than Mishkov? We lost that on Gauthier. Hopefully Drysdale will bring his play up to that. How are we going to get that player, though? We're hanging on to some of these guys and not allowing them to return us the kind of assets to put us in a position to get that star player.
I mean, for one thing, I mean, look, this has been a good year for Walker, but it's his first good year. And honestly, I feel like he's tailed off a smidge compared to the beginning of the year, mostly with points. He's been good defensively. But I think also people are kind of getting used to the Flyers' way of playing a little bit. If you notice, New Jersey on the power play is playing a defenseman deep now, so they can't get those offensive chances. And the last two games that the Flyers have played, that first period's been identical for the Leafs and the Devils, the way teams have played them. So they're starting to really do some video work on it. But as far as if you got him and you just were going to sign him for 2 years as a plug, you can't pay him over $4 million. It's just silly. If you pay him over $4 million and he's probably going to get 3 years, I think it just causes problems. I understand what you're saying about Drysdale, but Drysdale can do it on his own, or he can do it with other defensemen that they have or might come up, and you find out who teams well together. There's only going to be so much defensive progress you're going to make with Jamie Drysdale. That's not his game. It's never been his game. You can go look at other defensemen around the league that are like that are very offensive. Dobson was always going to have like a great all-around game. He had it in juniors. Drysdale didn't. Drysdale was always offensive, but it didn't matter in juniors. Now it matters, right? So they're going to try and get him in line. It's like Gostisbehere. There's no difference. Gostisbehere got it to a point where teams were like, all right, we could deal with it because of the offense that you bring. But if you're going to keep Walker in hopes that that's going to make Drysdale something that he's probably not going to be, I don't buy that.
Well, I think part of that is allowing Drysdale to play or be slotted in the lineup at a certain spot until he can take that, where Walker would take on some of those harder minutes. That's the rationale. Not saying I necessarily agree or disagree, but maybe a clarification on that.
How do we know that Adam Ewing can't do that next year? He's having a really good year. Lehigh may not be good, but they've got some defensemen down there that are good. How do you know he can't do that? And now you're signing Walker, where you have a young guy that A, is cheaper, and B, can be more of your future. You know what I mean? Like, these are, when you do something like this is the issue. It's all going to be about evaluation, and hey, however the team evaluates their players now and in the future is going to matter. Like this year, when they loaded up on defensemen, knowing that they had all these young defensemen that needed some NHL time, you know, John didn't care about that. John asked, obviously, for a certain amount, and he got it, right? So it definitely limits. Like, Ronnie Attard hasn't sniffed the NHL. He should get at least 5 games this year. If he doesn't get 5 games, it's not a good year for him. So, you know, that's the thing. If you want to give Andre 1 game, it would be nice to give him 1 game. But if you're going to, you know, claim that you're in the race all year, you may not do that. Although there have been opportunities with injuries that you could have brought him up for a game. Look, the Rangers are in a race. They brought up Matt Remp for his first game, and he got a fight, and that's good for his career. Like, he'll go down now. He'll be sparked. Those kinds of decisions, if you keep getting guys and keeping them and loading down contracts, that makes it harder. And, you know, and I know what they're going to say. They're going to be like, look, it's good to overbake the guys and everything. To a degree it is. But the idea should be you want everything to sort of start clicking when Mitch Kopp is there. So in 3 years, you want that to all happen. And if you sign Walker for 3 years, then he'll either be there the last year of Mitch Kopp, or then somebody else is going to have to take his spot, right? But again, some of these guys could have had more NHL experience up to that point instead of sitting in Lehigh. That's the worry that I have, is that guys are going to sit there too long. And there is a point where they can sit too long just because, hey, you know, it's like anything else. If you have a job and you feel like you should be, you know, promoted, and I've been in this spot, I'm sure Dan's been in this spot, and you feel like you've been promoted, and you're working a year, you still got no promotion, you're working 2 years, there is a point where you get demotivated a little. And you do have to look at that. And that's why it's a delicate balance for all of it.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, Attard's going to be 25, I think, in March. I mean, it was always going to be a late bloomer. Was he drafted his second year eligible?
Yeah, he was
drafted as an overager.
Yeah, okay. He was 20 when he was drafted. Yeah.
Okay, Dan?
20, then 20, 21.
So, yeah, I mean, everyone's been freaking out the last few days about this. First of all, a lot of it's posturing. I mean, the Flyers' new regime loves taking advantage of members of the media to try and get stuff out there. So take all of it with a grain of salt. That being said, if we're just looking, let's look specifically down the right side of the Flyers' defense for the next, 3 to 4 years. John Tortorella has already said he thinks Travis Sanheim is better on the right, and they would like to have him on the right. So let's assume that Travis Sanheim is going to be on the right. He's signed for 7 more years? Okay. They just traded for Jamie Drysdale. So let's assume that Jamie Drysdale is going to be, down the right side. His main value is going to be the top pair, the top power play D-man for this team. But let's just assume it's going to be those two guys. Sanheim and Drysdale are going to be on the right-hand side of this defense corps for the foreseeable future. Now you get to the current two guys. You've got, to me, there's 3 guys currently that I'm thinking of when I think of the next number of years. And apologies to we were just talking about him. What's his name? Ronnie Attard. I don't think Ronnie Attard is going to become a real good NHL defenseman. I'm not thinking about him. Adam Yinning, again, I am not a huge fan of Adam Yinning. If I'm thinking about a cup team in the future, I'm just not thinking of him and Attard. So in my mind, I'm thinking about 3 guys. I'm thinking about Ristolainen, who's signed for 3 more years, Sean Walker, who's expiring at the end of this year, and Oliver Bonk, who's probably going to be ready for the NHL. Let's just say 3 years. Let's say he plays his next year in London, then he plays a year in the AHL, then he's ready for the Flyers. It could be 2 years. Let's just say 3 years. So here's the thing. If you're going to extend Sean Walker, I don't think you can have Ristolainen here next year. So they need to, they basically, in my mind, they have to decide if they're moving forward, if they're going to keep Ristolainen or Walker or neither, but I don't think they can keep both of them. So let's say they decide to re-sign Walker. I think they need to be fairly confident that they'll be able to trade Ristolainen in the offseason. He's injured now.
A tough thing.
I know. That's the thing. It's going to be tough to trade him. So here's what I think is going on. I think the Flyers are not getting the offers at the moment that they were hoping to get for Walker. I think they want to get a first-round pick for him. They're looking at it and being like, all right, we're getting offered a 2nd and a 4th-round pick by the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's going to be the 60th pick in the draft. Who cares? We don't need that for a guy who's playing really well. Sealer and Walker has been the best pairing this year for the Flyers. So the Flyers are probably thinking about it like, all right, we can't just give this guy up for a 2nd-round pick. But also, do we want to sign him long-term? I've heard that Walker's camp wants 4 to 5 years, which I don't think they're going to commit to him. So it's that's to me is the situation. The Flyers would like to get a first-round pick for him. Maybe the offers aren't there. They're trying to use the media to create a scenario where they can get a first-round pick. I will be surprised if they sign him to a 4 or 5 year contract. So that's kind of where I sit with it. I do prefer him over Ristolainen because I'm a little worried with all the.
If that's the choice, everybody.
Yeah, I'm a little worried with all the Risto injuries this year. Actually,
well, teams are going to be worried about that too, Dan. That's the issue. The other issue is when you look at Kevin Hayes with the $3.5 million that's getting carried over the next few years. Let's say, and I was told hey, if the Leafs were to get him, let's say it'd have to be $4 million, right? Same as Klingberg. So now you're eating another 1.1 for the next 3 or 4 years. So now you're talking about $4.6 million just dead cap for the next 3-4 years. I wouldn't want that with my next potential superstar coming in with Michkov to have all this dead cap space, because if I don't have anybody in camp yet that I think is going to really gel with him, then I'm going to have to spend on the free agent market at that point. And I got to have all available funds for that. And so that's where that part of that equation gets tricky. And I do think there's probably a worry about Risto with the injury. We don't know what it is or what it was, but it's happened twice. And let's face it, Risto is an average NHL defenseman. He may be above average physically, but he's average.
Well, the way I look at it with Risto, you could make the case that Risto would be a lot easier to sell going into next year's trade deadline because you're going to have yet another salary cap bump. There'll be 2 years on a contract. And if you can sweat it out one more year with him, you're probably not going to have to eat that money. Because teams will have more flexibility, and then he becomes more attractive. Yeah, but by then you got about $6 million more on the cap between the 2 years.
I know, but it's still a high price for what the output is. That's the issue.
He had a very good year last year, and frankly, he didn't
this year.
Well, this year, he came out of the gate pretty well, and then he suffered. But I think he had that injury, so we'll have to see what that looks like. Chef, I want you to weigh in here, and if you want to open up a new vista with another player, feel free.
No. I think if you go 2 to 3 years max with Walker, if that's what you're trying to do, if you're trying to bridge it, then I don't think that's quite the issue that we're making it out to be. But I do say this: if they do sign Walker, then that means the end for Rista, because you can't have both of them. So that means they have something backdoored for Ristolainen, if that's the case. That's just my opinion, But if that's the case, so I did say a couple of years ago that. It wasn't going to be the contract that was great right now because of the cap, but it could, like you just said, I said it before 2 years ago, it could age very nicely in 2 or 3 years, and you could be able to get rid of it in that second or last 2 years. So that could be very interesting. So, but that's the only thing I have really to say about that. I'm not upset. If you're just trying to bridge the gap to make an impact for, like Russ said, you got to be ready. You got to be ready when Michkov's here. We can't take another year of posturing or another 2 years of posturing to get players here. You should be setting up for that and have them set up around for people. I want him to be here when he's here and he's learning from, quality vets that are here, good coaches that are here, and he's able to step in and just add to what's already here and maybe even elevate it if his play is going to be that generational.
Well, here's another scenario that's not getting talked about that I'm just putting together. The same way I kind of put together the Krebs thing. I had no sources for that. I was just looking at the landscape, and I'm looking at the landscape, and I'm hearing that the Flyers have been to the Manitoba Moose, right, to check them out. And you don't go there just to go there, right? I mean, it's obviously, that's out of the way.
It's a garden spot. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And so if you go there, obviously there's Brad Lambert, but Brad Lambert's not going to be on the availability list unless you offered something tremendous. So, but there's Chaz Lucic, and I'm sure that Brent Flair likes Chaz. Another American player. Or is he American? I think he's American. Yeah, I think he's from Kansas or something. Another player like that was probably on his radar draft year. Couldn't get him. He's had some injury concerns, but he's having a good year, but he hasn't played a full year. That's the kind of guy you could get, and you kind of wonder, would a guy like Sealer be in that trade? Because Sealer, being a Minnesota guy, it's not that far. It's not that far from home. He's probably the kind of guy that would sign a 2-3 year deal to play in Winnipeg because it's hard to get Winnipeg guys. And if you noticed, and this is what got my attention, it was a day or two after the Stadium Series that all of a sudden John Tortorella is talking about Nick Sealer getting to the net surprisingly, puck carrying surprisingly. Well, when I did a show today on the Hockey Buzzcast with Pete Tessier, he's always out there watching the Winnipeg Jets. He said that's what they need. They need a defenseman that can do that. Well, all of a sudden out of the blue, John's pointing that out. And Sealer is a plus 18. And so, I just found that to be kind of odd and out of place to do that unless there was something brewing with that. So I just think there's probably, a chance of something like that.
That's the other thought process here, is that the Flyers might not necessarily be looking for a real late first round draft pick. They could be after some of these players they liked in previous drafts who've come along, but maybe the team is a real contender and they think it's their year and you have to make sacrifices, just like Florida did with Giroux and the Flyers get Owen Tippett, and a scenario like that could unfold. The other thing is,
well, here's an example, right?
Yeah.
So if I look at this draft, there's centers in this draft, but there's no real first-line centers other than Macklin Celebrini. Maybe somebody else turns into one, right? And that happens. The same way like Aho turned into way more than people thought. It happens, right? But, like Danny Briere just recently told the Flyers season ticket holders that they want to get centers in this draft. That's fine. But if you get someone like Chaz Lucius, like that's a guy that would be highly, even if you went back to his draft year, higher rated than a lot of centers in this draft. So then you just have to hope he can stay healthy and you've got a spot for him, which they would. And that would satisfy some of what they're trying to do because honestly, if a strength of a draft is defense and I'm up to pick and I'm walking up there and I could get a guy who's maybe a second pairing defenseman, or I get a guy who I think is probably a third line center, maybe can be a second. And I know that we want centers. I'm still taking that defenseman because that defenseman's worth a lot. That defenseman, I could trade for something down the line. And I can't necessarily, there's no perfect shopping list in a draft, especially when the board's fluid and you don't know how that's going to go, right? So I think you could say that you want something, but I don't think you should be set on that.
I agree. I mean, you really have to go with best player available. Look what Anaheim did to get the Couturier. They
Right.
traded from a position of strength, and instead of just jumping on a guy for a position, and that's how you make the mistake. Like Kotkaniemi, he's a nice player, but should he have been drafted at that spot? Probably not.
No. And then they tried to make him a first line center, which was laughable.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So the other thing, Dan, is I was thinking as the ship's kind of getting situated there, what if the Flyers had more flexibility in terms of Sanheim and putting him on the left-hand side? I mean, if he had his druthers, he would put Sanheim on the right side. But you think about, if you look at the left side of their defense, how loyal are they going to be to a player like Sealer, right? I mean, this to me goes back to the mission statement, and every move they make has to harken back to what is the mission statement. They're in a rebuild. They want high-end talent. How do you do that? And the reason I'm saying this is one of the reasons they were successful this year was they had two units that were above average and performed way above expectation. The goaltending tandem, well, that's blown the smithereens now, right? Then Russ just put out an article on sportsology.com. You should check it out. Talks about how both Ursan and Nico Dawes in New Jersey are both very green, and it's going to be a concern for both teams going forward. Just an aside. But two, and I hope I don't lose my train of thought, that the defense was really good, and that Walker-Sealer pairing was one of the better second pairings in the whole league. And Sanheim came down, but still, overall, the defense was the best unit on the team. Now, if you take Walker out of there, and now you don't have the goaltending, we don't know what it's going to look like next year. Does the success that cultivated the culture here, and if that takes a hit, and they're 10 points lower in the standings next year, you want to have some compensation for that. So I'm thinking, why go part of the way? If they trade Walker, I think I'd want to trade them both. If you could set up a situation like Rush just talked about and maybe get that other player, because they're already going to take a hit with Walker. He's unquestionably been their most consistent guy just by eye test and looking at game score. We got some metrics here with Andy and Rono and Dom Lucian at hockeystatcards.com. Yeah, I mean, it all works out in his favor, and he's going to get paid for it, probably more than the Flyers want. So I'm just saying there's a lot of balls in the air here, and this is why Danny Briere wanted to be a GM. I don't know if I like that.
Well, let me answer your question, at least from my perspective, about Sanheim. Going into the season, I thought that he was arguably the most important guy on this roster, at least after I saw how he was playing early in the season, because I thought the defense was going to be the biggest reason why this team was going to be a bottom 5 or bottom 10 team in the league, was because of the defense. I thought the defense was going to be a disaster. And Sanheim's play the first few months of the season, I think, were one of the strongest lights that this team had, and one of the reasons that they weren't a disaster. And I think a lot of it was because he was on the right side. So I sort of have a pet peeve about like people assuming that a guy can be as good on the forwards, like left wing, right wing. Like it can make a huge difference for these guys. So if John Tortorella says that they think Sanheim is better on the right, I think he's better on the right, and they want him on the right, I don't want to fit square peg into a round hole. Like, let's get him on the right side. I don't see any major reasons not to. You've got him and Drysdale and Bonk eventually. Like, there's no other big time right defenseman in the system other than Walker. And if you could, extend him a few years, but basically to answer your question, I would try and have Sanheim on the right. Like the defense on this team, again, I think is the biggest reason they've been good. So I would try and stick with that. It is going to be interesting. You talked about Sealer and Walker, how good they've been. I think we sort of will realize that we took for granted how good that duo was and how nice it was to have a duo like that could sort of stay together and be such a positive presence in this lineup. So, I don't know. I love hearing Tortorella talk about Sealer in the press conference, Russ. I don't know if you were at that press conference where
I wasn't. But I saw.
It was like yesterday or today or before practice or after practice, and Tortorella was talking about how intense Sealer is, how insane he is, like during games, and how much of a positive presence he is in that locker room. Like, I would love to have him as a third pairing left-hand defenseman on this team for a long time to come. Like
John's going to push for that. Look, there's a very good chance he gets extended, but I'm just thinking because look, I think it's all pretty obvious that John and Danny have different thought patterns. So there may be a conversation if they have to put Sealer in a deal, and then John's not going to love it. But I think John thinks the way that you're thinking and what you're saying. I totally agree with you.
Yeah. So like, I just want to see, who are the potentially elite defensemen that we have in the system. And to me, you've got,
nobody's elite. Okay?
No, nobody's elite, but you know what I mean? Like a guy that can be potentially on a top two pairs of a cup team potentially. And I think York is pretty good. I think Sanheim's pretty good. I think Drysdale's pretty good. And Bonk hopefully is like that. You hope Andre might develop into that, but like, I don't have issues with keeping some of these guys around like Sealer and Walker as like third pairing guys moving forward. Because I don't see a whole lot of guys that are going to be in that top four from our current roster, even after adding Drysdale.
Well, here's the one thing though, the one guy we're leaving out, and I think he's going to get traded, and I think it might be a mistake, is Zamula. We're all not talking about him. His only job is to be on that dreaded 11-7, which I don't know if any of you guys like. I don't like it. But that's really the only way he's getting minutes with this coach. And I think he's better than that. I think he's played better than that. And so I can't tell you for sure, Dan, that he's not that guy. But I can tell you there's a chance, but we don't know because he doesn't really get that chance.
I like the way he thinks the game. It's just the linkage and the processing isn't there yet. And his recovery speed is real concern.
Way better than last year. Way better. Like he's making good decisions when he's getting the puck through on the power play. Like this power play stinks and they still can't put him by himself on the power play. They still had a chaperone. They had, Sanheim with them now in practice. It's like, just let him do it. He's getting the puck on net. It doesn't have to always go in. York can't hit the net. If Cam York could hit the net,
I think they're afraid he's going to be the last man back, though, and then he couldn't catch Couturier.
Zamula's gotten burned for breakaways twice on the power play, and I'm screaming at the TV. He's not fast, and I don't think he's.
Well, maybe that's over the summer. Maybe that's something they could work on.
Yeah, I don't think it actually. It pains me when they keep forcing him out there on the power play because I think he got lucky on a few goals from the point, and they're forcing him out there. I just think Cam York is like a better power play defenseman. Like, I don't know. And Drysdale clearly is better.
He's better at keeping the puck in. He's great at passing. He can't hit the net. And he doesn't want to shoot. He does not want to shoot.
He's got to work on that. Zamula's got to work on his skating and York's got to work on his shooting.
Because if you notice, when York gets the puck, it's like hot potato. He doesn't want to hold on to it. Drysdale wants to hold on to it. And the problem is only until really like a game ago were they even letting Drysdale walk around with the puck. Like, to me, the greatest thing that happens when a guy with offensive ability has it on the power play and he could take the puck from one side to the other and start stirring that drink, that causes problems for the other team. Yep. But if you don't have a guy that can do that, you're making it easier for the other team.
Yeah, that's the sport. They should let him do it. I mean, the only thing Zamula can do is get the puck through it. That's important. But yeah, I would turn Drysdale loose he's the best chance to generate. Chef, it's been a while. You go ahead.
Yeah. Like to Russ's point, like the couple times they have been successful with Drysdale on the power play is when he's mobile. He's moved around. Like it creates chaos. You need that. And yes, Zamula does get the puck through, and I agree with both what they said. But also too, to go back to Nick Seeler, because I was on a local radio station years ago with my radio partner then, and I always said to him, never underestimate the presence of that rah-rah guy in the locker room. And when I say that, the guy, he may not be the captain. He might not even wear a letter, but he's that guy that we get everybody fired up. And if you start plucking those out of this team, like you can go back and look what this team has missed over the last 4 or 5 years, 6, 7 years even. And it's been that guy that motivates the rest of the team. I'm not talking about the captains. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about those energetic players that can really motivate a room. I don't think this team has had it. If Seeler is one of them, then by all means, if it's a cheap fix for a couple of years, keep him here. I think he hasn't done anything majorly wrong not to deserve to be here. And he swayed I think 3 games off the top of my head where he's turned the game around himself by either a fight or getting thrown out of the game or whatever it is. He gets the boys fired up and they play for him. And I think that's it. I think that's what, you're in danger of losing if you don't have those guys, people that play for each other, because you're not just playing for yourself, you're playing for the guy next to you.
Okay, but
he might get paid more than we want him to get paid.
I understand that.
Yeah. Here's the thing, though.
Yeah.
I know Chef doesn't mean to do this, but he sounds like a New York Jets fan. And trust me, I know because I'm a New York Jets fan. And so, this was the argument for Mike White a couple of years ago. When the Jets had Mike White, he looks pretty good for 3 or 4 games. And Sealer's been pretty damn good. But again, Dan said it really well. If you want to get to that next level, then Nick Seeler's not going to be good enough to be on your third pairing if you're a real cup contender. That's just a reality. You may like him. You may want to clutch and hold on to him for a while because it makes sense. But there's going to be a point where it doesn't make sense.
I don't know what I said, but I think Seeler could be a third pairing D-man on a cup team.
But can he be a third on a cup team? I don't know.
A third pairing guy? I think so.
It depends.
Yeah.
I'd say I'm 50-50 on it. I'm not 100%.
Okay. Let's talk about Scott Laughton. And to me, that would be if there's something where a team or the locker room feels like gutted, if there's any player who would probably fit that description among the players who have been talked about, and he also happens to have probably the highest trade value of any asset that probably would be available, it is Scott Laughton. And he has term. He has a reasonable contract. His play is picked up recently. He had his best year last year. Not so great this year, but again, he picked up. Things are looking a little bit better. He's feeling better about himself. From what I hear, it is possible he could get a first-round draft pick again. Are we subtracting too much for now that where it would put them back, or can they replace that player and that first-round draft pick you get is too valuable to pass up, Russ?
I don't know if they could really get a first. They may be able to get a conditional first, but I don't know if they could just get an outright first. He's a good player. Obviously, you could play him in the wing or center. But, look, there's limitations. Not like you're going to put him in there for instant offense. The way I look at it is we'll talk the Buffalo thing for a minute because I thought, hey, if you could get Peyton Krebs for him, I'd make that trade tomorrow because I think Peyton Krebs could actually be an exciting player with a lot of speed. But the thing about Laughton is this. If you kept Laughton on the Flyers the next few years, I wouldn't say anything because he is good for the room. But you don't want to sign him after that. You're not going to sign Scott Laughton after that because based on what Scott Laughton has given you, he has given everything. And Torts has made him give even a little more. So you're going to be on the downside of that contract, like 3 years to Scott Laughton. You don't want to be in that world. So at some point, you do have to trade him or you're going to let him go at some point. So this is a good time to check his value because teams do want centers. But there's a little bit of a pecking order. Adam Henrique's going to go before Laughton most likely. And he is more talented. He might get a first. Might. Now, if he doesn't get a first, then I don't think Laughton's getting one. If he gets one, then I think there's a chance. So I think that's gonna make a difference just in seeing what happens with Henrique, because that's something where it's like, okay, let's see where he falls, because he's also got, a lot of experience too, and he's more offensive. But yeah, listen, Laughton's going to get talked about, and again, I had it on my feed. If you got what you wanted, let's say, and I don't think the Rangers can give you the 2024 first, because Dolan doesn't want to give that up, because they're going to be in the Sphere. He owns the Sphere. He wants the Rangers to have their picture on the board at some point in that first round.
How do I get Caco?
You might be able to get him, but I don't know if the Flyers want him. But you might be able to get a 2025 first and something else. It's possible if the Rangers get to that point. So I saw fans that didn't want to do that deal. Oh, why are you doing it? It's like, listen, it was okay. You did it 2 years ago. Why can't you do it now? Well, what has changed? Because it's a new era of Orange. Do you want to get? I think you want to get the best value. I do, and I don't think Scott Laughton staring you in the face for 2 years is really going to make you lose a championship or lose anything, really.
Okay, Dan, you want to weigh in on that?
It was Justin Braun whose name was.
Again, it depends on what you can get. If you can get a first-round pick for Laughton, I think you have to do it.
Yeah.
If you can't get that, and you can't get sort of like a prospect like we're talking about, like a Krebs or a Kakko or an Anton Lundell, you're not going to get. Like, I don't see how it makes sense to trade the guy for a second-round pick, because it's not like
I wouldn't do that.
Not like he's making a ton of money. So I think for him and Walker and I guess Sealer, I mean, it just all for me comes down to what they can get for these guys. Like, I've seen some people saying, well, if they can't extend Sean Walker, then they shouldn't keep him. I don't know. Is number 60th pick in the draft worth giving up a guy who's been arguably your best defenseman on a team that's playoff bound? I don't think I'd give him up for the 60th pick in the draft, even if you're not going to re-sign him.
Yeah, but all right, so here's what's funny, right? This was Walker's best year. If the Kings knew Walker could do this, they wouldn't have traded him, right? But they didn't know that he can do this. And there's no guarantee he's going to do it next year.
Well, he's been injured, though.
I know.
Isn't this a classic system fit, though?
It could be, but that 60th pick, while the odds are going to say can't be Walker, there's still a 20% chance it could be. So some teams would take that too, because again, and Walker is 29. So
the Kings traded him because they have Drew Doughty, Brant Clark, Jordan Spence. Like they needed to make room down the right-hand side of their lineup.
They haven't even used Clark yet. I get it. They're going to.
He scored the game-winning overtime goal 2 days ago.
Okay, so he's finally up regularly.
He's up now and he's playing. But you know what I'm saying. Like, theoretically, they didn't have room for him long-term down the right-hand side. And also, like I said, he's been injured. And so I think he's finally healthy. You might be right. He might stink next year. But I think if his game drops, it's going to be because of maybe he'll have another injury or maybe a team that's not as good a fit. Like, I think him and Sealer have just been so good together that fit seems pretty good here.
Yeah, absolutely. Chef, you want to weigh in? And then we're going to move on to our last topic with Russ.
Yeah, sure. I think as pertains to Laughton, I think if you get that number one pick, you can always sell it too, especially if it's to the Rangers or that draft pick prospect. You can always sell it as like you're letting Scott chase a cup. I mean, there's also a positive side from that side to it. Hey, we're giving him the best chance to get a cup in his lifetime. Let him go somewhere and do that. And then I think you can't, but. You could spell it like that. I really do agree with Dan. Like, is a second round worth it? I think if you hold fast, you got to sit there and go, you're right. And you know what? It's all going to depend upon what you're offered and what it is. And then it's hard to say no right now. It's hard to say yes right now, because you got to be put in that moment. Like, there's 6 minutes left before we have to decide whether to trade this.
You have
and
to be
do I pull the trigger? Yeah, do I pull the trigger? I can't let him up for nothing. I can't let that go for nothing. So if it comes down to a second or it comes down to a prospect, I'm probably going to have to do it because I have to think of the overall picture later on.
Yeah, and the dirt they have at certain positions, particularly center, there's something they can't ignore.
And this isn't going to happen. But what if what happened last year ends up happening this year because of all the things we just said? It gets complicated. I didn't get this for this. I didn't get that for that. At some point, they're going to have to make a trade just to show everybody it's not last year. Like, they're going to have to.
Right.
If they walked out of this deadline with no trade,
nobody's going to be happy.
It would not be viewed very well. I think we all agree with that.
No, that's reasonable. But they can't let that be the reason. But in the practical reality is they're going to do something in part because of that. I think
they're
probably a practical assessment. But I will say this, though. A little birdie told me that Scott Laughton, when it's all said and done, could bring a first-round draft pick under a certain condition. So we'll see. It sounds like Henrique is to Laughton like Tanev is to Sean Walker. Mm-hmm. And depending on what the market is for those players.
I think Walker's third. You got Hanifin too.
Yeah, Hanif is a different situation, though, because, I guess.
But I think Walker's ahead of Savard, not because he's better, but because the contract's better. But Savard's in there too.
You mean the guy in Montreal?
David Savard, who's won a cup.
Yeah. He's got a lot of miles. I don't know. It depends what you want. You want a guy to move the puck? I want Walker. You want a guy to block shots?
He's got Stanley Cup miles. Like, that does matter when you're asking teams to give up prime picks or prospects too. So I'm just saying, like, he could be fourth on that list. He could be third on that list. He's not first on the list, though.
Fair enough. Russ, we had a listener, Michael Johnson, request that you discuss a little bit about what the development model looks like in Lehigh Valley. And I'm thinking, well, the guy in charge of that this year is Alan McCauley. So that represented a change. They made a lot of organizational change with regard to development. Are they going to have to do some redos this year? Or is it just taking longer to take in effect? Because it seems like there hasn't been a lot of progress or opportunity, or am I confusing those two?
No, you're not confusing. I think there's been some progress. The record, not. I mean, they're looking like they're not making the playoffs unless something magical happens. I think they loaded themselves down with too many like AHL caliber guys, and that kept some of the younger guys from playing like a lot of games in a row. And Lappy would be playing like, these you play 2 out of 3. I got to put this guy in though, and I got to. So that's so they sent Gendron back to the queue, right? Gendron in the queue is like he has nothing to prove there. It's an easy league to score in. He's got 16 points in 10 games. 10 of them were goals. He should have stayed in Lehigh, but he should have been playing. That's the point, because he had like 5 goals. But he wasn't playing in prime spots. He was playing once in a while. And even Lappy said at one point, hey, if he scores, he's going to stay here. He's going to play. But, it's hard to get a guy to score like that. And I think we all know that. We've seen that happen, right? So I think there's been that. I think the goaltending situation has been weird because of Peterson and that contract and everything else. Hey, look, if you're happy with him, that's fine. I don't think he has a lot of future, though. I don't. And they had to eat that $5 million to get that deal made, to get Walker and all those other things, right? So that's something where I think they need to do something about, like basically buy him out. Because I think you need to start having, look, Kolosov may come over this year.
Right.
That's the hope, as long as Putin allows it. And I say that half kidding, but, he has said some stuff this year, like, threatening change in a bad way.
Well, he's a Belarusian, though, right?
Yeah, but does that matter if Putin doesn't want to let you out of the country? I mean,
it matters. He doesn't have to do military duty.
No, he could just say nobody's going. Like, he could just, he could put a lockdown on it if he wanted. You're right. Military, no. But if he wanted to just be a jerk about it, he could. I don't think he will. I don't. So I think Kolosov will be here. So you have him. I don't think they're going to keep Sandstrom, but I don't like what they did with Sandstrom this year. But part of that was because of Peterson. At the beginning of the year, though, like when he just wasn't playing, it didn't help him. And he's never gotten on track this whole year. So somebody else is going to take him. And I think, he'll be a guy who could occasionally get called up into NHL action. I don't think he's anything special. I always thought Ursom made a move like 2 years ago that was better and that he was going to be better. But I'm just saying that whole goalie situation, not ideal. So there's that. To me, they could have created pairs that stayed together in Lehigh this year, and they really haven't done that, with pairings. And, Adder and Yinning were good at one point. Like there were things they could have done with that I don't think they really stuck with. Like I would say it's like this. If you remember the year after lockout, the Sabres with Rochester, they brought up like a complete line, and I think they brought up a complete defensive pairing too from the minors. And it worked out because of continuity. And if you brought up two of these guys from Lehigh, let's say it was next year, let's say you saw them in camp that they were ready, and they were your third pairing, people would feel pretty good about it because A, that's your future, but B, there's continuity already. You've already built that up over a whole season. But there's not, right? So I think that's what they're suffering from. I mean, Bobby Brink, this is his last year. They're not giving him any kind of long-term contract or anything if he can't prove it. And he is yet to really prove it. I don't think that's the Flyers' fault. I think they actually have given him opportunity the same way they've given it to Foster, and so far it just hasn't worked. I don't like what they're doing with Lixell. I just feel like if you have Lixell there, like break glass just in case, then have somebody else there because they really need him in Lehigh. Like they do. And I get it, Lixell. And I always say this because I always want to say, I don't want to spend anybody's money. Lixell makes more money even just sitting on the bench as a pro than playing in Lehigh. But I'm sure he wants to play. And so I haven't loved what they've done with Lixell because, again, he's never even gotten a shot for more than a couple power play shifts. And he actually could do some things on the power play, but you have to give him a chance and let him. And that chance really hasn't been there for him. So I think there's that too. Because for all the time he spent away from the Phantoms, he's still their he has I think it's 0.85 points per game, still their highest point per game guy. Another thing, just as an example, this just as like an organization thing. You could call up Cooper Marody for a game when instead of playing 11-7 one night, he would not hurt you at all. He's been terrific for them. He's given you everything. That's what teams do sometimes. They'll throw a guy a carrot. We haven't seen a lot of that. And I think John's a little harder than some other coaches with that. So it's like, I can't blame Alan McCauley or even Danny Briere on that. I think that's just circumstance. But I do think that they should add to their group down there. I do think they're going to probably talk about a coaching change. And so I do think there's some things they could still do with Lehigh, and they've got to get it right. The other thing, and I think Dan would agree with this, you've got to match the AHL style to the NHL style. And and John has been like, don't worry about it. You do what you want, Lappy. Danny's got to put a stop to that because you really want a seamless transition when you want to call up guys. And I've seen this, and I've seen this in other clubs. If you have these guys playing the same way, it's easier for the coach to want to get some of these guys because they already know the system. They don't have to come up. You don't have to spoon feed them. You don't have to say, listen, I can't play him a lot of minutes because, those excuses go away. And that's what Danny has to take away, those excuses from John. He does.
So there seems to be a disjointed aspect to what is going on with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms and the big club. And maybe that's something they got to, iron out. Dan, you got to get rolling. Let me give you a chance to give you some final thoughts, and then we'll talk to Russ on the way out.
Yeah, I would just say Flyers fans shouldn't overreact to all this stuff on Twitter about them wanting to, re-sign Walker. What are they going to do? I mean, just keep in mind, a lot of this is posturing. I think that what this team does over the next few weeks before the deadline, and there's just about 2 weeks until the deadline, I think that's going to help kind of shape some of it. Hopefully they come out refreshed in Chicago and beat that team soundly like they should. Don't give up like a hat trick to Connor Bedard like they seemingly like to do to some of the elite players out there. But yeah, that's what I would say. We'll see what happens the next 2 weeks, and then we'll go from there. So,
fantastic.
I've got to run, but fans can find me on Twitter or X at dsilver88. It's always great having Russ on and talking hockey with him and Chef and Isaiah. So,
fantastic, Dan. All righty, Chef has been having some connection problems tonight, and I just want to give you the opportunity to have some final thoughts with Russ, and you have any more questions before we let our esteemed guest get back to the family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just think this. I think, and Russ will agree with me. Look, this year's been exciting. Mm-hmm. Whether they win or they don't win, it's been a very fun and entertaining team. And guess what? Based on what I predicted, and I'm going to stay with it, I think they're going to miss the playoffs by like 2 to 6 points, somewhere around in there. And that's okay. It's okay, because that would still make them 20-something points better than they were last year. So, guys, enjoy the ride. Enjoy the fun. I think Russ will agree with me. Just have fun with this team, because they are showing improvement. They're getting better. And you can have fun and just know that this is all part of the growth that's going to happen within the next 2 years.
You got it. Russ, we know you're at sportsology.com and at Sportsology on the app formerly known as Twitter. What else can you tell people about where they can find your work?
NHLDraftBuzz.com. I've got, my second draft list is up. I also do things like draft flashbacks. So I've got, videos from guys, maybe from their draft year, explain what it was like then, what they're like now, some fun things like that. So really everything that encompasses the draft. So it's NHLDraftBuzz.com. Also, EP Ringside. I've profiled a lot of guys from this year's draft already there, and I got a bunch more before we get to the draft. So EP Ringside is another place. Full Press Hockey. I do my prospecting there. So I'll give, prospect profiles there, and I do baseball too. I'll probably write about Bryce Harper with 8 years to go, wanting to renegotiate. I think I'll be writing about that. So yeah, fun stuff. Great time of the year. Shep is right. I'm not telling anybody they shouldn't enjoy things. They should. But I also am telling you, they have to look at that big picture. You always have to look. John doesn't want to look at the big picture, but everybody else has to look at it for John. And sometimes they may have to, walk up to him and say, this is for the greater good, John. You may not like it, but keep coaching. Keep doing what you're doing. If you can win this way, that's fine. But you might have to be 2 players less. That's all.
Gotcha. Russ, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
You take care. All right. So, Chef, I know you haven't had quite the contribution tonight that you would like. The conversation has been brisk and entertaining, including your segments. So any final thoughts other than what you were talking about with regard to just enjoy the ride and all that kind of stuff?
No. And I'll reiterate what Dan said. Stay true. Don't let everything you read on X or Twitter or wherever, any sites, get you all fired up for nothing, because guess what? It could just be like smoke screens. It could just be filler out there. It could be posturing, like Dan said. These agents got their own little armies out there trying to stir the pot to get as much money for their guy as they can, or just stir it to sway public opinion their way. Who knows? Just hang in there, and if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, you can breathe your sigh of relief. If that's what you want to, just stay the course right now, and just know everything is for the greater good.
Okay, you got it. And people can find you on the app formerly known as Twitter.
Yep, at Chef to Left B. Chef to the number 2, the left B.
You got it. You can follow the O&B Puckcast on the same app, at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. And of course, you can follow us on one of roughly a dozen podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, virtually anywhere you normally would get a podcast. We have a YouTube channel. Just plug in there, O&B Puckcast. And we also have a Facebook page. You can follow us on Getter, our backup plan, at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. And if you could subscribe And you give us a rating on Spotify and particularly on Apple. It really helps us. The subscriptions or the follows, whatever is appropriate for their particular platform, really help us because they move us up the charts and they tickle the algorithm there when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts, which, of course, we are. The Philadelphia Flyers are back tomorrow night, which is a Wednesday night in Chicago versus Connor Bedard, as previously mentioned. And then they have a weekend gauntlet. They play Saturday in the afternoon, against the Rangers at home. And then they go to Pittsburgh for another 3 o'clock, 3:30 TNT game on Sunday. We'll know a lot about their playoff chances just as those back-to-back games alone. And then, of course, they come back on the 27th at home versus the Lightning, who did a number on them with Kucherov and some of their stars. And it goes on. And then they have roughly, 4 more games after that until the trade deadline on March 8th. And they're back in Tampa on March 9th. But we'll get to that because I might be at that game in Tampa watching the Philadelphia Flyers representing FlyersNittyGritty.com. But we'll find out more about that a little bit later. So we're going to call it a wrap right there. Thanks for listening tonight. And until next time, everybody, take care.